All right, welcome back, sociology class. In today's explainer, we're going to completely deconstruct the late, great Stuart Hall's groundbreaking theories on how our identities are actively produced rather than just something we simply inherit. Now, if you're familiar with the Birmingham School of Cultural Studies, you know Hall was a central figure there. And his 1990 essay, Cultural Identity and Diaspora, it radically reframed how we perceive belonging in a post-colonial world. So I want you to go ahead and just forget the whole idea of identity as this static treasure chest buried somewhere in the past. Hall is going to show us that who we are is actually a vibrant, ongoing production. Okay, let's dive right into this. So, here's our syllabus for today's session. You can think of this as our roadmap through the dense but absolutely fascinating terrain of post-structuralist cultural studies. We are going to hit the Windrush context, move through the shift to constructivist identities, tackle some high-level theory, and then look at modern media and census data. Let's get going. Section 1, we really need to start by grounding Hall's lofty theoretical concepts in the very real historical trauma and displacement of the Caribbean diaspora. To really get this, just think about the timeline of Hall's own life. He was born in Kingston, Jamaica, and his arrival in Britain as a Rhodes Scholar at Oxford perfectly aligned with the famous Windrush generation. We're talking about a period where 500,000 Commonwealth citizens migrated to the UK. This massive demographic shift deeply informed his evolving intellectual toolkit. I mean, he watched firsthand as these Caribbean migrants navigated a rapidly changing British landscape, literally moving from being positioned as a problem by society to actively forging a brand new hyphenated British, Jamaican, or Afro-Caribbean reality.
Which brings us to our second point. This lived experience of the Windrush generation is exactly what sparked one of Hall's most famous interventions. So, historically, anti-colonial movements relied heavily on an essentialist view. Basically, they were searching for a single, unbroken ancestral core that was just hiding beneath the surface of colonial trauma. And look, Hall totally acknowledges that this was a politically vital shield at the time. It allowed marginalized groups to reclaim their dignity and their unity. But as a sociologist, Hall champions what we call the constructivist solution. He argues that for the diaspora, there is literally no pure, unmediated return to an ancestral origin, mostly because of the violent rupture of the Middle Passage. Because of that, identity isn't some static essence. It's a fluid production that's constantly subject to the play of history, culture, and power. And here's where he introduces this absolutely brilliant pun. Hall famously argued that we need to stop looking at our roots, R-O-O-T-S, where we came from, and start looking at our routes, R-O-U-T-E-S, as in the historical paths, migrations, and ruptures that we actually navigate. So identity isn't just about being, it's this constant, completely unfinished process of becoming. Okay, section 3. To understand how this fluid identity is constructed on a sociological level, we have to look at the theoretical machinery Hall used. First up, he borrows from the famously dense French philosopher Jacques Derrida, specifically this really clever concept, différance, spelled with an A. It actually combines the French verbs for to differ and to defer. By using Derrida's concept here, Hall is showing us that cultural identity is never a completed, wrapped-up fact. Its meaning is always deferred or delayed by historical trauma, and it differs across all the various geographic locations of the scattered diaspora. So concepts like blackness or Caribbeanness, they aren't static categories you can just pin down, they're fluid constructs that keep evolving through translation and mixing. But if Derrida shows us that meaning is fluid, Michel Foucault comes in to show us how that fluid meaning gets locked down by power. Hall uses Foucault to explain discourse, which is essentially the idea that the way a society talks about people actively positions them within a hierarchy. European colonial discourse historically positioned the Caribbean subject as the primitive other, which turns identity into a literal battlefield. So think of it this way. Derrida gives Hall the fluidity of identity, while Foucault gives him the power dynamics that individuals have to constantly negotiate against. Moving on to section 4. How does the Caribbean subject actually map out this complex, historically ruptured sense of self? Well, Hall provides this incredible triangulated framework to explain it. He maps Caribbean identity as a vibrant, constant dialogue between 3 deep presences. First, there's the deeply repressed présence africaine, the site of repression. These are the unsaid rhythms and traditions that miraculously survived slavery, functioning as an imagined geography that provides immense spiritual depth. Second, you have the imposing présence européenne, the site of power. This represents the colonial language and institutional exclusion that the subject actually internalizes. And finally, these two forces violently collide in the Presence American, the New World site of creolization. This is the physical ground zero where everything mixes, proving that hybridity isn't some dilution of culture, but actually its most potent creative manifestation. And we can see the tangible, electrifying cultural impact of this présence américaine, creolization, in actual creative works. These artists weren't just passively seeking a lost past, they were using art to synthesize a totally new sense of belonging. Just look at reggae and calypso. These aren't just entertainment, they're literal oral histories of struggle that brilliantly blend African rhythms with European instruments. Or take poet Camus Brathwaite, using fragmented nation language to decolonize English itself. Or even the avant-garde Black British film workshops of the 1980s, which completely disrupted stereotypical representations of Black youth. That mention of film workshops brings us perfectly to Section 5, and Hall's most significant contribution to media studies. All right, let's break down his step-by-step guide to decoding media texts. Hall completely challenged the old idea that audiences are just passive sponges soaking up television. He argued that media producers encode dominant ideologies into their texts, sure, but viewers decode them from one of three distinct positions. Number 1. Dominant hegemonic, where you basically just accept the message exactly as intended. Number 2, negotiated, where you accept the broad premise but you adapt it to fit your own lived reality. Or number 3, oppositional, where you actively resist and completely challenge the framing. If you've ever wondered why a viral TikTok sparks outrage in one group and enthusiastic agreement in another, well, this exact framework explains their differing agency. And Hall directly applied this to real-world sociology. In his 1978 study, Policing the Crisis, Hall explained how the British media actively engineered social order by constructing a moral panic around mugging, which disproportionately criminalized Black youth, even when crime rates were actually stable. Later on, in the 1980s, he coined the term authoritarian populism to describe how Margaret Thatcher's conservative government won the hearts and minds of a divided electorate by perfectly aligning national values with neoliberal economics. He showed us very clearly that power is secured by managing the discourse. But here's the thing, Hall wasn't just a critic. He was radically optimistic about the power of self-representation. Drawing on the psychoanalyst Jacques Lacan, he noted that we recognize ourselves through the cultural looking glasses provided by society. But when the diaspora actually takes control of the camera, they purge that internalized colonial looking glass. They shift from being the object being studied to the subject actively telling the story. For Hall, this proved that art doesn't just reflect who we are, it literally produces us. Which brings us to our final section today. As we close out this lecture, it's absolutely vital to look at the tangible sociological legacy of Hall's radical optimism. Consider the year 2001. That was the year the mixed category was finally officially added to the UK census. Now, this was a direct, tangible sociological result of Hall's theories infiltrating actual social policy. For decades, Hall theorized this hypothetical experience, insisting that being Afro-Caribbean or British Jamaican wasn't some dilution, but a specific, vibrant third space. The 2001 census finally validated the complex demographic reality of modern global citizens that Hall had already mapped out a decade earlier. Hall reminds us that we are all on a journey of constant transformation, inextricably linked to the stories we are told and the stories we choose to tell about ourselves. So, as we wrap up this explainer, I'm going to leave you with this final provocative thought. If your cultural identity is not a static root, but an ongoing production, what dominant narratives are you currently negotiating to forge your own route? Class dismissed. I highly encourage you to use Stuart Hall's brilliant framework to examine exactly how your own identity is being constructed in the world today. See you next time.